It was supposed to be a night out, just me and a few friends at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. The kind of place where reservations are booked months in advance, where the chandeliers shimmer like diamonds and every guest seems to have an air of wealth. I had heard about this place for months. An old friend had spoken about it, telling me how it was the place to be. We arrived early, excited, feeling like we had finally made it into the inner circle. As we approached the entrance, the doorman gave us a once-over, but he opened the door for us. I noticed a few looks exchanged between the staff, looks that were hard to miss. But it didn't bother me at first. We were led to our table, which was tucked away in the corner of the room, and I felt a sense of pride settling in my chest. The waiter, however, didn't seem as welcoming. He was cold, almost dismissive. When I asked about the specials, he barely glanced at me before answering in a tone that lacked any warmth. He handed me the menu, then quickly turned away. I glanced at my friends, trying to shrug off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. But it didn't take long for it to become clear. We were halfway through our appetizers when the manager came over. His crisp suit and polished demeanor screamed authority, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He stood by our table for a moment, looking at each of us, before turning his attention to me. "Excuse me, sir," he began, his voice smooth but firm, "I'm afraid we won't be able to continue serving you tonight." My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't quite process what he was saying at first. The room around me seemed to quiet down, the low hum of conversations fading into a distant blur. I glanced at my friends, who were just as confused as I was. "Is there a problem?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The manager didn't flinch. "It's just that, well, you don't quite meet the dress code. We have a certain standard here, and you're not quite in line with it." My mind raced. I was dressed in a clean, tailored black jacket and dark jeans. I had made sure to look sharp for this occasion. So, what was the real issue? Why was I being singled out? Before I could respond, he added, "We'll gladly help you find another place to eat if you'd like." The word stung. It felt like the entire room was watching. My friends exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. I stood up, slowly, my mind swirling with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. I felt humiliated, but something inside me snapped. I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at the manager, then at the room full of judgmental eyes, before grabbing my phone from the table. "I'll take care of it from here," I said, my voice more controlled than I felt. I stepped outside onto the cool sidewalk, my phone already in hand. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. My fingers flew over the screen as I quickly dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang a few times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello." The voice on the other end was calm, reassuring. "Hey, it's me," I said, my voice low but resolute. "I need you to pull up some details for me. We've got a problem." The voice didn't ask questions. "What happened?" I explained the situation, how I had been treated differently, how the manager had practically escorted me out of the restaurant because of my appearance. How he said I didn't meet the standard. I could feel my chest tightening as I spoke. I wasn't angry yet, but the injustice of it was starting to hit me. "I'll take care of it," came the reply. As I ended the call, I looked up at the restaurant, its glowing lights now seeming distant and cold. It was time to make things right. Moments later, my phone buzzed. An email came through with the details I needed, the restaurant's ownership records. I read it over quickly, my heart racing. The name listed at the top was all I needed to see. I turned back toward the restaurant, a new sense of confidence filling my chest. I wasn't just some random kid getting dismissed by a staff that thought they knew better. No, I was the one who owned this place, or at least, I owned part of it. I walked back into the restaurant, the hum of conversation still lingering in the air, but now I felt different. It was as though the entire space had shifted, and I was no longer the quiet teenager in a fancy jacket, I was someone with the power to change everything in that room. The manager was still standing near the front, talking to one of the waitstaff. When he saw me walk in, his eyes widened slightly, his smile faltering just for a second. But he quickly regained his composure. "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked, a little too smoothly. The tone had changed, but the air of condescension remained. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took a few steps toward him, holding my phone loosely in my hand. I could feel the tension in the room build as every eye turned toward me. The whispers started almost immediately. "I think you know exactly what the problem is," I said, finally breaking the silence. "But I'll make it clear for you." I pulled up the ownership details on my phone and handed it to him. "I own this place. Along with a few other locations in the city," I continued, my voice calm but laced with authority. "So, unless you want a much larger issue on your hands, I suggest we have a different conversation about standards." The manager's face drained of color. He took the phone from me, staring at it as though the words were too much to process. The room was eerily quiet now, the usual chatter replaced by the uncomfortable shuffle of feet. You're the CEO." He stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, watching his discomfort with a sense of satisfaction I wasn't expecting to feel. "Yes, I am. And I'm sure you'll understand why I won't be paying for this meal." The manager stood frozen for a moment, still holding my phone, his eyes darting between the screen and my face. I could tell he was scrambling to find the right words, but nothing he said would fix the moment. His previously polished exterior had shattered. You can't just walk in and expect to get special treatment," he sputtered, trying to regain some control over the situation. "This is a prestigious place. We have rules." "Rules?" I repeated, my voice low and controlled. "You had a rule that didn't apply to me. That's the problem." The room had gone silent. Every eye was trained on us, on the manager who had been so confident only minutes ago, now on the verge of a meltdown. I could feel the energy shift, the weight of the moment hanging in the air like a cloud. I gave him a final, cold stare. "I'll be taking my business elsewhere. And I suggest you start treating all your customers with the respect they deserve. You never know who's sitting at your table." Without waiting for a reply, I turned to walk away. My friends, who had been standing in the background, followed quickly, though I could tell they were still processing everything. The staff in the restaurant remained still, uncertain, watching us leave. As we stepped out into the night, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't about the meal or the restaurant. It wasn't even about the manager or his ignorance. It was about making sure that no one, no matter who they are or what they look like, ever feels like they don't belong in a place simply because of their appearance. As we got into the car, I looked at my friends. "Don't worry," I said, smiling. "I think we'll be okay." And as we drove away, the city lights shining in the distance, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, the emails started flooding in. The calls came soon after. I had known that the situation would stir things up, but I hadn't expected it to escalate so quickly. The story about what had happened at the restaurant had already made its way through social media, with my name attached. Within hours, it was trending. The backlash against the restaurant was swift, but the response to my actions was even more overwhelming. News outlets reached out for interviews, and messages of support poured in from people I didn't even know. I was bombarded with texts, social media posts, and calls. Some praised me for standing up for myself and others, while others questioned my motives, calling it a publicity stunt. But then, I received a call from the restaurant's corporate office. The voice on the other end was smooth and professional, but I could sense the urgency behind the calm tone. "I'm calling on behalf of the ownership group," the voice said. "We're aware of the situation, and we'd like to invite you to discuss this matter in person. We want to ensure something like this never happens again." I didn't need to be told twice. The invitation was clear, and I wasn't about to let it go unanswered. After all, there were more than just rules to fix. There was an entire mindset that needed to be confronted. A few days later, I found myself walking into the headquarters of the restaurant's corporate office. The building was sleek, modern, and looked every bit as high-end as the brand it represented. But inside, I felt a strange calmness, like I was walking into a lion's den but knowing I had the upper hand. I was greeted by a receptionist who immediately led me to a large conference room. The walls were lined with abstract art, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The long, polished table at the center gleamed under the soft lighting, and at the far end of the room, a few executives were seated, waiting for me. One of them, a middle-aged man in a dark suit, stood up as I entered. He had a well-groomed beard and a tired expression. He extended his hand with a stiff smile. "Mr. Thomas, thank you for meeting with us. We understand this situation has escalated, and we want to ensure we make things right." I shook his hand firmly, maintaining my composure. "I'm glad you reached out. Let's make this quick. I don't have much time, but I'm sure we can work something out." He nodded, then gestured for me to sit. I took my place at the opposite end of the table, looking each of them in the eye. "We want to offer you an apology," he continued, glancing at his colleagues. "We understand that what happened at our restaurant was not just an error in judgment but an unfortunate oversight. We have already begun reviewing our staff training programs and will ensure that every person who works for us understands the importance of respect for all customers, no matter who they are." "That's a good start," I said, leaning forward slightly. "But it's not enough to just train your staff. You need to make a public commitment. Something that makes it clear this won't happen again. People need to know that you understand the real problem." The executives exchanged glances, and the man who had spoken before took a deep breath. "We're prepared to issue a public statement, yes. And we're also offering you a seat on our advisory board to help oversee our diversity and inclusion initiatives. You've clearly shown you have a unique perspective, and we'd like you to be part of the process moving forward." The offer hung in the air for a moment. I considered it. It wasn't what I had come here for, but maybe it was what the restaurant needed. The changes had to come from within, but someone had to help steer the ship. "I'll accept," I said finally. "But only if you take this seriously. This isn't just about me, it's about every person who's been overlooked or treated unfairly because of how they look. You've got a lot of work ahead of you." The man nodded, clearly relieved. "We'll do whatever it takes." Weeks passed, and the changes at the restaurant began to unfold in ways I hadn't expected. My role on the advisory board pushed me into a seat of influence I hadn't fully anticipated, but it was one I took seriously. The restaurant began publicly addressing the incident. The CEO made a formal apology, acknowledging the failures of the management team and the unfortunate treatment I had received. Along with the statement, they launched a series of internal reforms aimed at enhancing inclusivity, new staff training programs, a complete overhaul of their hiring practices, and a commitment to monitoring their customer service interactions more closely. They even introduced a partnership with several community organizations focused on diversity and accessibility. But the real change wasn't just in the corporate policies. It was in the culture. I started receiving messages from employees, waiters, bartenders, chefs, telling me about the impact the new initiatives were having. Many were already seeing shifts in the way their coworkers interacted with customers. There was a noticeable difference in how staff treated everyone, regardless of their appearance, background, or social status. And for the first time, it felt like the restaurant's environment wasn't just about the food or the luxury, it was about making sure every person walked in the door with dignity. As for me, I couldn't ignore the sense of accomplishment that came with it. The night of that uncomfortable dinner, when I was pushed out and made to feel inferior, was now behind me. But it had opened the door for something much bigger. I had stepped up when it mattered and, in doing so, had forced a powerful institution to recognize its flaws. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had changed the conversation. Sitting in my office one afternoon, I reflected on it all, on how one small act of resistance had started a ripple effect that reached further than I could have imagined. My phone buzzed, breaking my train of thought. It was a message from one of my old friends, now a frequent guest at the restaurant. Just ate at the new place. It's different now, better. I think you really changed something, man. I smiled, feeling the weight of that simple message. I'd fought for respect, for fairness, and now, maybe the restaurant was just a little bit better because of it. As time went on, the ripple effect of that night continued to unfold in ways I hadn't expected. The changes at the restaurant weren't just cosmetic or superficial, they began to inspire a broader shift in how the company approached diversity, not just within its walls, but in the community as well. The board began implementing monthly community outreach programs, hosting events that brought people together, people from all walks of life, regardless of their background or social standing. These events weren't just about making the company look good, they were about true engagement, about showing that real change was possible when everyone felt seen, heard, and respected. On a personal level, I found myself gaining new perspectives, not just as a CEO, but as someone who had experienced firsthand what it meant to be overlooked or treated unfairly. This experience had shown me the power of standing up for what's right, and the importance of not letting a moment of injustice slide. The day I was invited to speak at a large conference on inclusivity and leadership was a turning point. I shared my story, what happened at that restaurant, how it had inspired me to push for more than just an apology. As I spoke, I could see the faces in the audience, people nodding, some even wiping tears from their eyes. It wasn't just my story they were connecting with, it was the larger story of everyone who had ever felt invisible. As I walked off the stage, I knew that I had made a difference. And for the first time, I felt that the world was ready to listen, not because of who I was, but because of the message I carried. A message that anyone, no matter their age, appearance, or background, deserved respect and dignity. And that's something worth fighting for.